Old Time Radio DVD's Big Sale Event. From September the 1st to December the 31st, 2018, I will be making all of our collections available. That's all of them. If you've ever wanted to own one of these collections and you've put it off, don't put it off any longer. I will never be able to offer these again. The collections are perfect gifts for family and friends. Go to oldtimeradiodvd.com today and place your order. Don't wait. Please allow up to 2 weeks for delivery. Share this information with everyone you know. The fantastic deal of a lifetime to own one of these marvelous collections. Go to oldtimeradiodvd.com today and place your order. You'll be glad you did.
Ordeal in Space by Robert A. Heinlein. Maybe we should never have ventured out into space. Our race has two innate fears, noise and the fear of falling. Those terrible heights. Why should any man in his right mind let himself be placed where he could fall, and fall, and fall? But all spacemen are crazy. Everybody knows that. The medicos had been kind, he supposed. You're lucky. You're still young, and your retired pay relieves you of all worry about your future. You're in fine shape. Fine shape. His voice was unintentionally contemptuous. No, I mean it, the chief psychiatrist had persisted. The little quirk you have does you no harm at all, except that you can't go into space again. Fear of falling is normal and sane. You've just got it a little more strongly than most. But that is not abnormal in view of what you've been through. The reminder set him to shaking again. He closed his eyes and saw the stars wheeling below him. The psychiatrist's voice pulled him back. Steady, old man. Look around you. Sorry. Not at all. Now, tell me, what do you plan to do? I don't know. Get a job, I suppose. The company will give you a job. He shook his head. I don't want to hang around a spaceport. Wear a little button in his shirt to show that he was once a man. I think you're wise. Best to make a clean break, for a while at least, until you're feeling better. The psychiatrist stood up and shoved out his hand. Holler if you want anything. Thanks. You're going to be all right. I know it. But the psychiatrist shook his head as his patient walked out. The man did not walk like a spaceman. The easy, animal self-confidence was gone. Only a small part of Great New York was roofed over. He stayed underground until he was in that section, then sought out a passageway lined with bachelor rooms. He stuck a coin in the slot of the first one, which displayed a vacant sign, chucked his bag inside, and left. The monitor at the intersection gave him the address of the nearest placement office. He went there, seated himself at an interview desk, stamped in his fingerprints, and started filling out forms. It gave him a curious, back-to-the-beginning feeling. He left filling in his name to the last, and hesitated even then. He'd had more than his belly full of publicity. He did not want to be recognized. Presently, he printed in the name William Saunders and dropped the forms in the slot. He was well into his third cigarette when the screen in front of him lighted up. He found himself staring at a nice-looking brunette. Mr. Saunders, the image said. Will you come inside, please? Door 17. The brunette in person was there to offer him a seat. Make yourself comfortable, Mr. Saunders. I'm Miss Joyce. I'd like to talk with you about your application. He settled himself and waited, without speaking. When she saw that he did not intend to speak, she added, Now take this name, William Saunders. We know who you are, of course, from your prints. I suppose so. Of course, I know what everybody knows about you, but your action in calling yourself William Saunders, it caused me to query the files. I know quite a lot about you now, more than you saw fit to put into your application. It's a good record, Mr. Saunders. Thank you. But I can't use it in placing you in a job. If you insist on designating yourself as Saunders. The name is Saunders. Don't be hasty, Mr. Saunders. There are many positions in which the factor of prestige can be used to obtain a much higher beginning of pay than... I'm not interested. She looked at him and decided not to insist. As you wish. If you will go to reception room B, you can start your skill tests. Thank you. 3 days later found him at work for a small firm specializing in custom-built communication systems. His job was calibrating electronic equipment. He was building himself a well-insulated rut, working, sleeping, eating. He tried to keep his past life shut out of his mind, but his memory of it was still fresh. He would find himself daydreaming, the star-sharp, frozen sky of Mars, or the roaring nightlife of Venusberg. Or he might, for a time, feel again the sweet quiet of the long watches on the lonely reaches between the planets. But such reveries were dangerous. It was easy to slide over and find himself clinging for life to his last handhold on the steel sides of the Valkyrie. Then he would come back to Earth, shaking uncontrollably. The first time it had happened at work, he'd found one of his benchmates, Joe Tully, staring at him curiously. "What's the trouble, Bill?" "Nothing," he had managed to say. "Just a chill." "You better take a pill. Come on, let's go to lunch." Tully led the way to the elevator. Most of the employees preferred to go down via the drop chute, but Tully always used the elevator. Saunders, of course, never used the drop chute. This had eased them into the habit of lunching together. He knew that the chute was safe, but he couldn't force himself to step off the edge. Tully said publicly that a drop chute landing hurt his arches, but he confided privately to Saunders that he did not trust automatic machinery. It warmed him toward Tully. He began feeling friendly and not on the defensive with another human being for the first time since the start of his new life. He began to want to tell Tully the truth about himself, if he could be sure that Joe would not insist on treating him as a hero. As a kid, hanging around spaceports, he had dreamed of being a hero of the spaceways. But he was troubled by the fact that he still had the same picture of what a hero should look like and how he should behave. It did not include shying away from open windows, being fearful of walking across an open square. Tully invited him home for dinner. He wanted to go, but fended off the invitation while he inquired where Tully lived. The Shelton homes, Tully told him. "It's a long way to come back," Saunders said doubtfully, while turning over in his mind ways to get there without exposing himself to the things he feared. "You won't have to come back," Tully assured him. "We've got a spare room. Come on." "Well, all right," he conceded. "Thanks, Joe." If he could not find a covered way, he would take a ground cab and close the shades. Tully met him in the hall and apologized in a whisper. "Meant to have a young lady for you, Bill. Instead, we've got my brother-in-law. He's a louse. Sorry." "Forget it, Joe. I'm glad to be here." He was indeed. The discovery that Bill's flat was on the 35th floor had dismayed him at first, but he was delighted to find that he had no feeling of height. The lights were on, the windows occulted, the floor under him was rock solid. He felt warm and safe. He even managed not to hear most of the aggressive and opinionated remarks of Joe's in-law. After dinner, he relaxed in an easy chair listening to the conversation. The brother-in-law was still sounding off. "We ought to annex 'em," he was saying. "That's what we ought to do. 3 planets treaty. What right have they got to tell us what we can and can't do on Mars?" "Well, Ed," Tully said mildly, "it's their planet, isn't it? They were there first." Ed brushed it aside. "Did we ask the Indians whether or not they wanted us in North America? Nobody has any right to hang on to something he doesn't know how to use. Rights of natives. What rights do a bunch of degenerates have?" Saunders found himself contrasting Ed Schultz with Nath Soothe, the only Martian he himself had ever known well. Gentle Nath. Why, Nath could sit for hours with a friend, saying nothing, needing to say nothing. Growing together, they called it. His entire race had so grown together that they had needed no government until the Earthman came. Saunders had once asked his friend why he exerted himself so little, was satisfied with so little. More than an hour passed. Then Nath replied, "My fathers have labored, and I am weary." Saunders sat up and faced the brother-in-law. "They are not degenerate." "Huh? I suppose you are an expert." "The Martians aren't degenerate. They're just tired," Saunders persisted. Tully grinned. His brother-in-law became surly. "What gives you the right to an opinion? Have you ever been to Mars?" Saunders realized suddenly that he had let his sensors down. "Have you?" he answered cautiously. "That's beside the point. The best minds all agree." Bill let him go on, and did not contradict him again. It was a relief when Tully suggested that maybe it was about time to go to bed. He said goodnight, then followed Tully into the guest room. "Only way to get rid of that family curse we're saddled with, Bill," he apologized. Tully stepped to the window and opened it. "You'll sleep well here. We're up high enough to get honest-to-goodness fresh air. Well, sleep tight. I've already set your bed for 7. That'll give us plenty of time." "Thanks, Joe. Good night." As soon as Tully was out of the room, he braced himself, then went over and closed the window. Sweating, he sank down on the edge of the bed. He knew too well that the peace of mind he thought he had regained was unreal. There was nothing left to him but shame and hurt. To have reached the point where he had to knuckle under to a 10th-rated knothead like Ed Schultz, it would have been better if he had never come out of the Valkyrie business. Presently he took 5 grains of Fly-Right and went to bed. He had been asleep and dreaming for an indefinitely long time. He was back in space again. He was happy, with the full happiness of a man who had awakened to find it was only a bad dream. The crying disturbed his serenity. At first it made him only vaguely uneasy. Then he began to feel he must do something about it. The transition to falling had only dream logic behind it, but it was real to him. His hands were slipping, and there was nothing under him but the black emptiness of space. He was awake and gasping, but the crying persisted. He shook his head, then listened. It was real, all right. Now he had it identified. A cat, a kitten by the sound of it. He sat up. Even if he had not had the spaceman's traditional fondness for cats, he would have investigated. His ear led him to the correct spot. The sound came from the window. He tried to collect his thoughts. He told himself that it was unnecessary to do anything more. The sound must be coming out of some nearby window. But he knew that he was lying to himself. In some impossible way, the cat was just outside, 35 stories above the street. He took 6 nervous steps toward the window, as if he were being jerked along. He sank down to his knees, grasped the window and threw it wide open, his eyes tight shut. After a time, he opened his eyes, being very careful not to look down at the street. He had half expected to find the cat on a balcony. It seemed the only reasonable explanation. But there was no balcony, no place at all where a cat could reasonably be. However, the mewing was louder than ever. Slowly he forced his head out and made himself look down. Under him, a narrow ledge ran around the side of the building. Seated on it was a ratty-looking kitten. It stared up at him and meowed again. He considered calling Tully, then thought better of it. Tully was shorter than he was, had less reach, and the kitten had to be rescued now, before the fluff-brained idiot jumped or fell. He tried for it. He shoved his shoulders out, clung with his left arm, and reached down with his right. Then he opened his eyes, and saw that he was a foot or 10 inches away from the kitten still. He stretched till his bones cracked. The kitten promptly skittered away from his clutching fingers. He inched back inside and collapsed, sobbing on the floor. "I can't do it," he whispered. "I can't do it. Not again." The rocket ship Valkyrie was approaching Mars Terminal. William Cole, Chief Communications Officer and relief pilot, was sleeping when his assistant shook him. "Hey, Bill, wake up. We're in a jam." "Huh? What's that?" But he was already reaching for his socks. "What's the trouble, Tom?" 15 minutes later, he was reporting the facts to the old man. The primary piloting radar was out of whack. Tom Sandberg had discovered it during a routine check. The captain had shrugged. "Fix it, mister, and be quick about it. We need it." Bill Cole shook his head. "There's nothing wrong with it, Captain. Inside. She acts as if the antenna were gone completely." "That's impossible. We haven't even had a meteor alarm." "Might be anything, Captain. Might be metal fatigue and it just fell off. But we've got to replace that antenna. Stop the spin on the ship and I'll go out and fix it." The captain looked annoyed. "I've started to take the spin off, but I can't wait that long. Jury-rigged the astrogational radar for piloting." Cole started to explain why the astrogational radar could not be adapted to short-range work, then decided not to try. "It can't be done, sir. It's a technical impossibility." "When I was your age, I could jury-rig anything." "Well, find me an answer, mister. I can't take this ship down blind." Bill Cole hesitated for a moment before replying. "I'll have to go out while she's still got spin on her and make the replacement. There isn't any other way." The captain looked away from him, his jaw muscles flexed. "Get the replacement ready. Hurry up about it." Cole found the captain already at the airlock when he arrived, with the gear he needed for the repair. To his surprise, the old man was suited up. "You're not going out, sir?" The captain simply nodded. Bill took a look at his captain's waistline, or where his waistline used to be. Why, the old man must be 35 if he was a day. "I had expected to make the repair myself." "I never asked a man to do a job I wouldn't do myself." "Excuse me, sir, but can you chin yourself with one hand?" "What's that got to do with it?" "Well, we've got 48 passengers and—" "Shut up!" Sandberg and he, both in spacesuits, helped the old man down the hole after the inner door of the lock was closed and the air exhausted. With spin still on the ship, every direction outward was down for millions of uncounted miles. They put a safety line on him. Nevertheless, it gave Bill a sinking feeling to see the captain's head disappear in the bottomless, black hole. The line paid out steadily for several feet, then stopped. Bill leaned over and touched his helmet against Sandberg's. "I'm going out." The captain was stopped, hanging by both hands, nowhere near the antenna fixture. It was no great trick, Bill found, to swing himself along to where the captain was stalled. The Valkyrie was covered with handholds for the convenience of repairmen at the terminals. Once he reached him, it was possible, by grasping the steel rung that the captain clung to aid him in swinging back to the last one he had quitted. 5 minutes later, Sandberg was pulling the old man up through the hole, and Bill was scrambling after him. He began at once to unbuckle the repair gear from the captain's suit and transfer it to his own. He lowered himself back down the hole and was on his way before the older man had recovered enough to object. Swinging out to where the antenna must be replaced was not too hard. The increased spin bothered him somewhat. The airlock was nearer the axis of spin than was the antenna. He felt heavier as he moved out. Getting the replacement antenna shipped was another matter. It was neither large nor heavy, but he found it impossible to fasten it into place. He needed one hand to cling by, one to hold the antenna, and one to handle the wrench. That left him shy one hand, no matter how he tried it. Finally, he jerked his safety line to signal Sandberg for more slack. Then he unshackled it from his waist, working with one hand, passed the end twice through a handhold, and knotted it. He left about 6 feet of it hanging free. The shackle on the free end he fastened to another handhold. The result was a loop, an improvised bosun's chair, which would support his weight while he manhandled the antenna into place. The job went fairly quickly then. He was almost through. There remained one bolt to fasten, on the far side, away from where he swung. He decided he could manage it with one hand. He left his perch and swung over, monkey fashion. The wrench slipped as he finished tightening the bolt. He watched it go, out and out, down and down. It made him dizzy to watch it. He shivered. Good thing I was through with it. It would be a long walk to fetch it. He started to make his way back. He found that he could not. He had swung past the antenna to reach his present position, using a grip on his safety line swing to give him a few inches more reach. Now the loop of line hung quietly just out of reach. There was no way to reverse the process. He hung by both hands and told himself not to get panicky. He must think his way out. Around the other side? No, the steel skin of the Valkyrie was smooth there. He looked down and regretted it. There was nothing below him but stars, down and down, endlessly. He found himself trying to hoist himself bodily onto the single narrow rung he clung to, trying to reach it with his toes. It was a futile, strength-wasting excess. He hung limp. It was easier if he kept his eyes closed, but after a while, he always had to open them and look. His hands were becoming stiff and cold. He tried to rest them by hanging by one hand at a time. He let go with his left hand, felt pins and needles course through it, and beat it against his side. Presently it seemed time to spell his right hand, but he could no longer reach up to the rung. He did not have the power left in him to make the extra pull. He could no longer feel his right hand at all. He could see it slip. It was slipping. The sudden release in tension let him know that he was falling. Falling. He came to with the captain bending over him. "Just keep quiet, Bill." "Where?" "Take it easy. The patrol from Mars was already close by when you let go. They tracked you on the scope, matched orbits with you, and picked you up. First time in history, I guess. Now, keep quiet. You're a sick man. You hung there for more than 2 hours, Bill." The meowing started up again, louder than ever. He got up on his knees and looked out over the windowsill. The kitten was still away to the left on the ledge. "Here, kitty," he called. He let go the windowsill with his right hand and gestured toward it invitingly. The kitten approached about 3 inches, then sat down. "Here, kitty," he pleaded. The fluff ball promptly backed away again. He withdrew his arm and thought about it. If he were to slide over the edge and stand on the ledge, he could hang on with one arm and be perfectly safe. He needn't look down. He drew himself back inside, reversed himself, and with great caution, gripping the sill with both arms, let his legs slide down. He focused his eyes carefully on the corner of the bed. The ledge seemed to have moved. He could not find it and was beginning to be sure that he had reached past it when he touched it with one toe. Then he had both feet firmly planted on it. He took a deep breath. Letting go with his right arm, he turned and faced the kitten. If he were to creep along the ledge, holding on with his left hand, he could just about reach it. He moved his feet one at a time, baby fashion. The kitten sniffed his groping fingers, then leaped backward. One tiny paw missed the edge. It scrambled and regained its footing. "You little idiot," he said. "Do you want to bash your brains out?" The situation looked hopeless now. The baby cat was too far away to be reached from his anchorage at the window. He called "Kitty, kitty," rather hopelessly, then stopped to consider the matter. He could give it up. He could prepare himself to wait all night in the hope that the kitten would decide to come closer, or he could go get it. The ledge was wide enough to take his weight, if he made himself small, flat to the wall. He moved slowly forward, retaining the grip on the window as long as possible. When the window frame was finally out of reach, when his left hand was flat to smooth wall, he made the mistake of looking down, past the sheer wall at the glowing pavement far below. He pulled his eyes back and fastened them on a spot on the wall. He was still there, and so was the kitten. Slowly he separated his feet, moving his right foot forward, and bent his knees. He stretched his right hand along the wall until he was a little beyond the kitten. He brought it down with a sudden swipe and found himself with a handful of scratching, biting fur. He held perfectly still. Then, arms still outstretched, body flat to the wall, he started his return. He could not see where he was going and could not turn his head without losing some margin of balance. It seemed a long way back, longer than he had come, when at last the fingertips on his left hand slipped into the window opening. He backed up the rest of the way, then got his right knee over. "Man," he said aloud, "that was a tight squeeze. You're a menace to traffic, little cat." He glanced down at the pavement. It was certainly a long way down. Looked hard, too. He looked up at the stars. Mighty nice they looked, and mighty bright. The kitten settled down in the cradle of his stomach and began to buzz. He stroked it absent-mindedly. He would go out to the port and take his physical and his psycho tomorrow, he decided. He scratched the kitten's ears. "Little fluffhead," he said, "how would you like to take a long, long ride with me?"
Adam Sims was reading Ordeal in Space by Robert A. Heinlein. The story was abridged and produced by Gemma Jenkins.